Thank you so much. Again, good morning, good evening to everybody who is with us today. Thank you so much for joining us for Writers Beyond Borders. And today we have our guest author, Damyanti Biswas, whom I'm going to introduce to you. Damyanti Biswas's Indian debut literary crime novel, You Beneath Your Skin, was an Amazon bestseller and optioned for the screens by Endemol Shine. Her next novel, The Blue Bar, was published in January 2023 via Thomas and Mercer and received a starred review from Publishers Weekly. Her work has been published in Smokelong Quarterly, Ambit Pembroke Review, Griffith Review, among many others in the US, UK, and Australia. She also serves as one of the editors of the Forge Literary magazine. Thank you, Damyanti, so much for being with us today. And I know it's late in the night for you, so I really, really appreciate you making the time to be with all of us across the world. Welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's 9:30 p.m. here in Singapore, and also for others who are joining in from Malaysia and Singapore. I see some names. I think I saw Clara. And thank you everyone for joining in today. As we said, we are going to speak about characterization. But before I start off, I'd like to make one thing very clear, which I wish had been made very clear to me in workshops I had attended when I began writing, is that this is just one author's take on characterization. So it's not it's just my process. It's the process that works for me. It's the way I write stories. It's the way I write characters. Part of the writing journey, I feel, is discovering what process works for you, what works for your story, what works for your characters. So feel free to take whatever is useful, and whatever is not useful, you can just put it aside. I won't mind in the least. So this whole today, whatever time I'll take speaking will be mostly talking about how I develop characters, and through characters develop plot. So for me, characters come first and plot come next. For you, it could be different, but I'm just going to take you through a process of characterization that has worked for me with my novels. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is going to be more commercial than literary, because I'm a commercial novelist now, but I began life as a literary short story writer. So some of the aspects will, of course, work for that as well. And as I take you through the process, I'll kind of, tell you which parts are more suited to a more literary audience or a literary writer, and which are more suited to a more commercial writer. So with that caveat, I'll just start off. To me, whenever I think of stories that I read. And before I think of writing stories, I always put myself in the place of a reader. And as a reader, whenever I read a story or I read a novel, I read a book, a week later, a month later, a year later, a few years later, what really remains behind for me is the character. If I'm interested in the character, if the character fascinates me, if I care one way or the other. So I may or may not like the character, but if I find the character intriguing, I find that is helpful for me to sink into the story. Because when we start a novel, one of the challenges we face as readers is kind of getting to know this new world, these people, and getting to care for them. So it is much easier if the character is somebody who we find intriguing and we are like, oh, this is different. Oh, maybe they're sympathetic, maybe they're not, but they're interesting. So that for me is the very first thing when I think about the character. The other thing I think about is while going into a story, there can be no story without a character. So if I, don't have a character, I don't have a story. So stories are about characters. And at what kind of stories, what makes a story. So if a character just woke up, went through their day and came back home and went back to bed, is that a story? Not really. If you think about all the movies, as an example, a character goes into the world and immediately something goes wrong. So usually a story is when things begin to go wrong, that is where we step into the story. So for me, the way I look at character is, a character needs to want something. Uh, it has to be, for a novel at least, it has to be a very deep, abiding want, something that they have wanted for years and years and years. And this is like an external goal. So they want to be the boss of their company. They want to find their, the ideal one. They want to find a partner. They want to have a child. They want to write a book. They want to, go to Alaska. They want, this famous ring or a sword or whatever it is, but they want something. And there is, of course, something that is preventing them from getting it, right? So there's this deep unmet desire towards which the character is going off. And that journey for me begins the plot. And how the plot happens, and I know I'm speaking about the plot, but the plot and the character, for me, they are joined at the hip. You can't have one without the other. So for me, I would take a character's unmet desire and think of what it is that is preventing them from achieving that desire. Of course, there will be external obstacles. So there could be the antagonist, there could be various people who would be standing in their way of that goal. Or there could be a ticking clock, there could be a storm outside, there could be a tsunami, there could be n number of things that are preventing him from getting to that place or getting to that goal. But more importantly for me is that there is something inside of them as well that prevents them from getting to that goal. So maybe they're looking for a promotion, but they don't really believe that they deserve that promotion. They kind of don't believe they're worthy. So they have this misbelief. So they have this lie that they believe in, which is, standing in the way of them getting to their goal. So then what happens is you have a situation where you have this deep desire to get something, and then you have something that is opposing it all the time. It is, something that opposes it at each juncture. So to me, that is what creates the tension in a story. So we do talk about, a plot-centric story or a character-centric story. We call it usually plot-driven or character-driven. To me, I don't think any story is plot-driven or character-driven. They are tension-driven. So when you want something and you can't get it, there's a resultant tension, and that tension is the jet propulsion fuel. Now, where that tension comes from, again, like I mentioned, I would be talking more about commercial fiction, but also a little bit about literary fiction. So when you have this tension that is external, when the external journey is more important, the plot arc is more important, then it becomes more of a commercial fiction, because there the external action is more important. The reader expectation is for something to happen to the character to gain something, and for there to be plot movement. When you come to literary fiction, the internal action becomes stronger. So that has more importance. So there you will have the internal change that makes the story. So that is what the reader comes there for. The reader wants to see how the character transforms. That is not to say that the character does not transform in a commercial fiction, but that's to say that that transformation is kept more subtle it is very, very important, because if that transformation doesn't happen, the reader tends to lose interest in the character without understanding why. You see a lot of things happening, a bus goes flying, something falls from somewhere, huge action is going on, but you feel that there's a disconnect. And that disconnect is not just the disconnect with the story, it's a disconnect with the character. The reader is not feeling connected with the character. So at all points of time, we keep in mind, or at least I keep in mind, that there is an external goal and there are obstacles against it. These obstacles can be external, but also internal. Now, when I think about a character, if I think first, for me, we could think about a character who walks into a page with a name fully formed, like it happens when we write flash fiction or when we write a short story. A character is fully formed, and then you kind of intuitively begin to discover the character. That definitely is a way of doing it. But when you're writing a commercial novel, to keep the story focused, to keep your plot arc and your character arc working, in the sense that when your character arc is driving your plot arc, so when the internal change in the character, every time the character changes, every time they come up against an obstacle, they evaluate it, they react to it, they change. Next obstacle, they evaluate it, they react to it, they change. So that incrementally they change towards the end of the novel, coming towards the climactic point, when they have to go and do something which really needs them to completely change on the inside for them to be able to achieve something on the outside. So at that point, the plot arc and the character arc kind of coincide. And some of the most successful stories are stories where the jet fuel is the character arc. The character transformation is what is propelling the plot forward. So when that happens, I've spoken about a character being intriguing, a character having an external goal, and an internal misbelief, something about them or something about the world that they believe in, which prevents them from getting their goal. So to get to all of these three things, if we have this alchemy, what happens is the reader is more and more interested in this character, because they begin to, root for this character. Are they going to get this goal? Are they going to change? So if we are able to get these sorted out, more or less at the outset, not necessary. I mean, it depends upon your process when you sort it out. But I would say that it is important that we do sort it out at certain point of time, that what are these, what is their external want and what is their internal misbelief. To do this, usually what I do is I would go back to thinking about why they want what they want. And to do that, I would be looking at their childhood. I would be going back, because I feel a lot of what shapes us happens, even before the age of 7, even before the, age of 13, 14, 15, we are fully formed in our worldview. There are certain things that we begin to believe. If there's a character whose father leaves, for example, they would feel abandoned, and they would try to then protect themselves from that hurt. And that would shape how they think of all the other relationships in their life. So I would kind of try and look at this internal misbelief, try and see what it is that is not working out for this character. To do this, I would write scenes of their childhood. So if there is a misbelief, so for example, if there's a misbelief, the child, as a child, they came to a situation where they felt, abandoned. For example, something happened, their mother leaves and never comes back. And that's it. Like, that's the last they see of their mother. There's no explanation, there's no goodbye, and she's gone. So I would go and write that scene exactly as if that scene were to be published. So I will write it with its entire setting, everything. All of it will not go into my novel, but I would write it, because in the writing of it, I would intuitively begin to understand what makes this child tick, and how this child would become an adult, what sort of an adult that child would become. And I would begin to have inklings of why it is that they want what they want. So maybe as a grown up, maybe it's a romantic novel and they want, a perfect partner. But, here's this boy who wants this man who wants this perfect partner, but is being held back because throughout there is this misbelief that relationships don't last, people will leave without saying goodbye, and they're not even aware of it. Most of the times this misbelief is subconscious. And I would try and write maybe one scene, maybe two scenes, because we come to a conclusion once, the child comes to a conclusion once, and then they would try and test it on the world. Every time we learn something about the world, every time we gain an insight, we try and test it out the next time. And how is it that throughout their life that one misbelief has become strengthened to the point where we see them in the novel? Because on the first page of the novel, they already have a past, they already have a worldview. So my whole idea is to try and figure what these things are. And to do that, I would, sometimes do other scenes. So I would try and think about, what is it that they're ashamed of? What are they guilty about? Who are they trying to forgive? When was their last time they were happy? When was the last time they were desperately sad? Or what is it that they carry in their pockets? What was the last dream that they had? And this, I earlier used to, before I started writing novels, I used to do this stage when I was writing short stories and flash fiction. I used to do this stage much before. So I would try and intuitively do it. But now with writing novels, I find that it is much more streamlined. The process is much more streamlined if I look at all of this through the lens of what they want externally and what is their internal misbelief. Because every person contains multitudes of stories, right? Every character, each of us carries so many stories within us. But which is the story I am trying to tell? I, as the author, have picked up this person, this character, and I'm trying to tell a story about them. But which one of their 15 stories, they have so many stories in their lives, which one am I telling? And if I know which one I am telling, then I know which is that goal and what is the thing that is preventing this person from getting it. Then everything else are kind of begins to fall around it. I kind of begin to think about what they would be ashamed of, but related to what their goal is. What is it they regret, but related to what their internal misbelief is. What it is that makes them very sad, but related to, again, what their internal misbelief is in this particular direction, in this story that I'm trying to tell. So then it is easier for me to write into the heart of the story as I'm writing the character. So as I begin to write the character and I begin to figure out what it is that they want, I find that I am writing those actions, right? Because every time, if they want to go towards that goal, they are taking an action, they are being thwarted, they are gaining an insight, they are taking a new decision, and then they are applying this insight to the new situation that comes up. And so it becomes like, insight, decision, action. So already I'm beginning to think of, plot points. So these are the things that I try and do intuitively, very much based on these scenes that I am writing on all these aspects. So shame, regret, anger, pride, tenderness, passion, uh, forgiveness, all of that, but not in terms of writing like a nonfiction paragraph saying this is what they regret. No, going into that moment that they deeply regret and actually writing it out, fully fleshed out like a scene, which probably will never go into the novel, but I will be kind of, it will inform my decisions of, the character begins to do things on their own. So sometimes when you have this logic of what is it that they want and what is it that the misbelief they have inside, and everything you kind of plotted very accurately to that, you say, okay, this is what they want, so they are doing this, the character becomes very robotic. So instead, if you kind of stray from that path a little bit, take it more intuitively, the character becomes more fully fleshed out. And by this time, when I've done a bunch of pre-writing, pages and pages and pages of writing about the character, by the time I'm coming to the plot, before that, this is the point of time when I am thinking about what is it that they look like? Because as I'm writing these scenes, obviously I have written some description about them. They have become real to me. So this is where I am thinking about, okay, this then is their age. This is what happened to them when they were this age. They are this age now. This is what they are. This is what their internal problem is. They have a lack of confidence. So this is what their body language is like. This is what their mannerism is like. So instead of seeing all of it from outside in, I am looking at the character from inside out. So as I go further and further into the plot, it is all informed by just those two things, what they want and what they need or what their misbelief is. And at this point of time, to kind of, change things around, I would do things like, for example, I would give the protagonist one of my own annoying habits. So something I don't really like about myself, but I would try and give it to the protagonist, because then I do not feel in love with the protagonist the whole time. So I'm able to look at them objectively. Or I'll take the antagonist and I will give them a characteristic which I really like probably in somebody I love dearly, like my mother or like my husband, something that they do, which I like very much. I will give it to the antagonist. But always, all of this is still being informed by what is it that they want and what is their misbelief. But because I have that guiding principle, I do not have a lot of, I find in a lot of manuscripts, we have a lot of character descriptions, we have a lot of things that they do, but how does it relate to the plot? It doesn't. I just did a whole lot of thinking about the character, so I have written all of this down. But how is it relating to the particular story that you're writing, that you're trying to tell? Because one human is 1,000 stories. You have picked one story. So how are you following the thread of that particular story? Is kind of that character arc is defined by, what they want and, what it is that they have this misbelief about. And then when you write the description, you are able to pick the right detail. So you don't have to say, from the top to the bottom, exactly what they're wearing, describe every single thing, describe all the features. No, you can kind of describe just one feature, a particular way they wear clothes or whatever, something that shows who they are internally. And then that rings very true. And the way somebody walks into a room, or the way people react to somebody walking into the room, is much more evocative than the miles of description. You can give so many, but because you know what story you're trying to tell and who exactly you're trying to tell it about, you're able to pick that right detail. And you're able to as you write, for me, as I'm writing these scenes of shame, of regret, of fear, all of these, I'm putting them into action and I'm giving them dialogue. So that is why they are full scenes, which will never go into the novel, but they are being given action and dialogue because every time somebody acts, somebody does something, they are being characterized. No two people will react to the same situation in the same way. So if there is a robbery, an armed robbery going on, somebody would lie down and cower under the bed. Somebody would try and take something very flimsy and try and hit the robber. Somebody would look for the gun. So very different people will have very different reactions. And if we have already seen our character in various scenes of their life, it is almost like knowing how they are going to react in this scene, which is part of the plot arc, which is part of their desire, going towards the desire and being thwarted. So then it fits into the plot arc. So as you have action and dialogue in these fully fleshed pre-writing scenes you've done, you will know how this person is going to react in almost any situation. And your protagonist is going to be only in your story. He is not going to be the protagonist of another story. And the protagonist of another story cannot fit into yours because your protagonist determines what the story is, who your protagonist is, what they want, what they need, what their misbelief is, actually directs what your story is going to become. So your character arc is actually beginning to determine your plot arc. And at this point of time, I also start thinking of character types. Am I playing to archetypes? I am thinking of who's the leader, who's the follower, who's the disruptor, who's the antagonist, who is the selfless one, who is the peacemaker. And then I am seeing where each of these characters would fit. So I have the protagonist is obviously somebody whose desire is the deepest and whose story would be hence the longest, and the desire is the deepest. So it's a big goal. And they also have a big misbelief about themselves. So their transformation will take that much time. So you have in the subplot, you have characters who are at various places in this journey of transformation. So some already know. So there is this guide character, or there would be somebody who would be giving them advice. So here comes the best friend, here comes the teacher. So all these people, then they will have their own arcs, but none of their arcs will be as big as the arc of the protagonist. But not to say that they won't have their own arcs. I follow very much a similar process for the smaller characters as well. So that, and then how the interrelationship works, that also characterizes the protagonist. How a man treats his wife or how a mother treats her daughter characterizes this person. So in relationship to each other, also characterization happens. But again, always in the direction of the story that I'm trying to tell. And at this point, I'm thinking of, naturally, it has already come to me by this time, the mannerisms, because I've written it in so many scenes. So now I know, okay, these are the kind, when this character is stressed, this is how they will act. And I know what mannerism is true to them because I know where the genesis of that mannerism is. I know when that mannerism took place for the first time in their childhood, because I have taken the time to get to know them. So if I have done all of that research, this person is like my real best friend or my husband, but only in that direction of the story. The rest of it, I'm blinkers on. The rest of it, there are other stories that I could tell, but that's not my novel. That's not the short story I'm trying to tell. So I am always, I have this direction in which I'm going. And as I'm writing, I'm thinking also of the five senses. So I'm not just thinking about this character, how they look. I'm thinking about how they sound, how they smell. In romantic novels, what they taste like, and, touch. So all of it. So all of that informs the character. So by the time I am beginning to write the first draft, I know what my who my character is and what it is that they are going to go and do. And then sometimes the character will kind of do something which I kind of had not anticipated. And that is when I know that this character has become not just a product of my psyche, but has become an independent entity of his or her own. And then the decisions that they take can take my plot into surprising directions that I hadn't thought of, but are definitely true to that character. So this is how I work with plot and character together. I kind of never think of them as two separate things. And this is how I kind of take the stories in the direction I need them to go. Also, because if you're writing on contract with a deadline and you are told you have to produce a novel about this and this and this, or you're writing a sequel. So this makes life slightly easier. When writing literary fiction, of course, this is helpful in certain ways, because sometimes in literary fiction, there's a lot of description, but in the end, it's very good writing, but in the end, it's not a story, it's a vignette, because we haven't seen any kind of movement or change or anything at all, internally or externally. And I read so many of those stories as an editor at the Forge Literary Magazine. This month is my month to, select 2 stories. And I see so many literary stories where you couldn't care less about the character, as in you're not intrigued by the character. You are stunned by the beauty of the writing, but you don't know what's the story. What is the story about? What is it that I'm supposed to, take from it? Why am I there's a barrage of beautiful language. So I kind of find that by following the method that I follow, it's easier for me, even when I'm writing short stories, to kind of do the, draft after draft after draft, because then I look at them through a lens of what do they want, what do they need, what is their misbelief, what is keeping them from getting it. And even though there's in my short stories and literary short stories, no bus falls on nobody's head, there is still something that is happening. There is a transformation that is happening internally or externally. And that brings me, I think, to the end of my spiel. Survi, how are we doing on time? And I'm happy to take questions if anybody has any.
Awesome. Awesome. Firstly, thank you. This was great insight, and comments are pouring in the chat. So we'll get to them later, but this is awesome. Before we move into the Q&A, I just want to tell you a couple of things. I do like to take a group picture, which I will share, and any of you can share on social media if you want to. So while Josh gives us a count of 3, if you're able to turn on your cameras and feel comfortable doing so, please do. Otherwise, feel free to stay off camera. And I think we might have to do a couple, because I can see like sliding into 2 screens because we have like over 25 people. So Josh.
I'll give a countdown here. So, all right, 1, 2, 3. I'll do one more to make sure we get everybody in there. All right. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you.
Okay.
Guys, thank you. Thank you, Josh. All right. So the program is such that you won't be able to unmute and speak, but you feel free to put your questions in the chat, and I'll keep reading them to her while she answers them. I'm also going to say in here a couple of things. There is a handout that she has prepared for the participants of this program. But if I don't have your email, or you haven't registered, email is not with one of us, I won't be able to send it to you. Before the end of the program, I will request you to send it to me in personal chat on Zoom if you think either of us don't have your email. And another thing is, if we don't get to all of your questions, because we have a very, very big group here, by 10:30 a.m. Eastern time, I'm going to ask you to reach out to Damyanti on her Twitter handle, which I will share just in a minute, and she will respond to you from there. Okay. Let me see if there are any
And
questions.
if you do reach out to me on Twitter, I'll just do a Twitter thread. So if you have something that you feel that I said which was not clear enough and a certain aspect that you wanted me to clarify, and if it is not clear in, when I respond to your questions now, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter and I'll do that.
Thank you. All right, guys. So it's Q&A time. So feel free to throw your questions in the chat and she'll be. I'm going to just scroll through to see if I missed anything already. While we wait, Damyanti, can you tell us a little bit about the publishing journey? A little bit, because I know that a lot of people have some stuff published, might be different types of publishing. So whatever your thoughts are.
Well, the traditional publishing journey is a depressing journey, and that's something that you have to kind of know at the outset. It's more failures than successes, and you will have your share of failures, even though you will, and I don't mean to pour buckets of, disappointment, but you will have your share of disappointments, whether they come early in your career or later in your career. You've got to be ready for that. You've got to be ready for the fact that not everybody will love your work, and they will take great pains to tell you that they don't love it. A lot of them will, they will conceal the fact that they love your work. They will tell each other how much they love your work, but they will maintain it as a big secret from you. So a lot of people won't tell you how much they love your work. They truly do. But if they hate your work, they will stalk you everywhere. They'll tag you on social media and they'll let you know that, they don't like your work. And you have to be prepared for that. And I'm only giving the negatives because my hope is, if somebody is at the very outset of the writing journey, please run away now. Because, why don't you? I mean, some days I question myself, why am I here? Why am I killing myself? And I'm not alone. Everybody, all of us who are in this grind, they question themselves. Even the people, I mean, other than maybe Leigh Bardugo today, who's got an 8-figure deal for her 12 books, and other than her, I think maybe even she has problems. So we will have in the publishing journey, we will have a share of disappointments. The whole idea is to stick to it. God knows why. The part of the journey is to figure out your why. If you figure out your why pretty early in the journey, you will be less of a disgruntled writer, because then you won't have these, you will not have a whole lot of expectations in a certain direction. And at least you would be preparing to go in the direction of what you want out of the writing journey. In my case, I started writing literary short stories, and they began to get published after tons of rejection. So for every, let's say 80 stories I sent out, probably 2 got accepted. Sometimes, a story got rejected 70, 75, 90 times, and then suddenly won an award. And I thought I was going to bin it. So there's no logic to this in short stories. When it came to novels, my first novel got me 4 agents offers. I thought I'm set. And then my book didn't sell for 3 years. And then when it sold in India. Then me and my agent broke up. Then I got another agent, and, I had to go back into the query trenches again. And then I got a 2-book deal. And then I don't know, I have sent in the proposal for the next and next and next. So nothing is certain, so to speak, in publishing. The only thing certain is you have to figure out your reason of why you're doing it. Because if you don't have your own reason for why you're doing it day in and day out, it can become very hard on your mental health. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, in the writing, in the publishing profession, is how to keep yourself sane, really. Not just happy, but just barely sane. And because a lot of it just doesn't make sense, right? Things are outside of your control in trad publishing. And I recommend self-publishing to people who have the chutzpah to do it. I don't. But if you can do self-publishing, at least it gives you some measure of control. It makes you feel like you're able to, at least change things as you want them, which traditional publishing doesn't. So, okay, that's my rambling about publishing. I'm done.
Thank you. That was very useful. Okay, Mary asks, when did you start writing and why novels?
I started writing back, I think, in 2008 or 9, and I did not start writing novels. I thought writing novels was foolish, which is something I maintain even now, because there's no way of knowing what you started, whether you're going to finish it, whether it's going to become a book. It may not become a book. It might become this sad little, misshapen thing which you're ashamed to show the world. And maybe that's how it'll stay. And those are your trial Frankensteins, if you will. So I did not want to write novels, but I ended up beginning my first novel, You Beneath Your Skin, in 2011, because my husband said, well, I'm complaining too much about this short story because it was going on and on and on. And he's like, of course, it's not a short story then, it's a novel. So I started writing a novel, and that became You Beneath Your Skin. And it took me 8 years from when I started writing the first draft to, in 2019, it was published by Simon & Schuster. And yeah, that's how it happened.
You see the next question from Neeta. I'd love to know any tips on how one can make a place a character, for instance, like a city. Yeah, I think like in the Blue Bar, Mumbai is definitely a character. So yeah, your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Neeta. It's not something that, I don't know if you set out to do it intentionally. I certainly did not, but I'm always told that my setting is almost a character. I think it comes from a place of respect, in the sense that you have to, when I'm writing, I write from a place of deep respect for two entities, and one of them is my characters and another is my reader. So the respect for the characters I've already spoken about. The respect for the readers is like, readers are very unforgiving people. I certainly am. So when I start reading and I find there's an error on a certain page, and the Blue Bar has an error, Shilpa knows about it, and she knows how much I've been tearing my hair about it. It's gone into print and it has an error. So the minute that error comes out, people stop reading. So a setting has to be, to me, the way I see it, it has to be as real and as vivid as you can make it. You have to be able to see it, smell it, touch it, all the five senses involved, all the five senses, at least, the way when I revise it during the copy editing stages, in every 2-3 pages, if there are no 2 or 3, sense of smell or sense of hearing something or touching something, so something other than sight, because our brain, the way it is, really, we are not really seeing this color is not this color, I am not here. These are just rays and, things that we are absorbing, and our eye is telling our brain something, and our brain is sitting in this dark place, and it doesn't really know the difference between how that sensory input is coming in. So the sensory input could be coming in through actually hearing something or tasting something, or reading about something that, is being tasted. And the effect on the brain is exactly the same. It produces exactly the same juices and does exactly the same thing. It's been scientifically studied. So the more you give a full sensory experience, and again, what you do for the character, you pick the right detail that I was talking about. The same thing about the setting. You have to pick that right detail. What is it that makes Los Angeles, New Delhi, Shanghai, New York, Tokyo, what makes a rural place in the US different from a rural place in Africa and different from a rural place in the Nordic region. So pick the right details and make it extremely sensory. That's how I would, and that all boils down to respecting the reader, saying, yes, I have tried to make it as perfect as possible. So that's how I try and make the setting into a character. It's never really like deliberate, but that's what happens if it's evoked properly, if you're doing it right.
Kathleen asks, do you have any favorite characters? Can you tell us a little about them and why they are your favorites?
I had to ask a follow-up question. Characters from my books or characters in general? Kathleen.
She's typing.
Sorry.
From your books, she says.
Okay, from my books. Not really. I don't have favorites. After a while, I kind of try and forget about them so as not to repeat them. I'm done with them, and I try and forget about my books. I try and forget that I've written these and put these into the world because I'm interested already in something new. So my favorite character is the one I'm trying to crack right now, because my whole goal is to figure out how people tick. And if I figured out how this person ticks, so he or she's already not my favorite. They're already done, right? I figured out what makes them tick. So, okay, bye. My favorite is the one that I'm writing next.
All right. Rashmi asks, hi, Damyanti. I'm usually at a loss to give specific characteristics to the characters via dialogues. Like everyone talks differently. When it comes to dialogues, I don't get it.
Right. Hi, Rashmi. Dialogues are not easy. There's a reason you find them hard, is because they are devilishly hard. They are not easy. When I cannot say how you're going to write a dialogue, I can tell you, I can share my process. When I write a dialogue, I am writing it after at least 10,000 words of pre-writing. So I have written about that character so much in scene that by the time they come into the novel, I have written them as they are when they're teenagers, as they are when they're children, when they're young people, when they're middle-aged people, when they're old. So I have kind of tried, and I've put them in so many different situations. So I it kind of comes to me naturally. One of the rules I follow is that I try and whenever I see that dialogue is kind of going on and on and on. So if it is like 5 lines or 6 lines, I immediately start questioning it. So what is the information are you giving? What is it that, you are trying to say that you've not set your story right? So the character is actually talking. And as you know, I see a lot of this in stories. As you know, this happened. And as you know, and I'm like, nobody talks like that. Nobody says, as you know, because we already know. So if you don't know, you don't know. You know what you know. And another thing that's been tremendously helpful to me when writing dialogues is this book called Improv. I don't know. I can't remember the name of, I can try and tell Surbi later, but it's called Improv, the name of the book. So it's about talking, improvising, right? In theater. So when you go into the theatrical world, the director kind of gives you one word and 2 people kind of start throwing it at each other. One of the things that very quickly becomes apparent is that when 2 people are talking, they are not at the same level. They're not at the same status. So it's like, sometimes it's clearer, like the mother and the child. Sometimes it's 2 colleagues, but even when it's the husband and the wife. So even if the relationship between a husband and a wife is very equal, through experience, you will see that there are certain situations where you're the lower status, and then certain situations where you're dominating. So you're the dominant. So always to remember that every time a dialogue is happening between 2 people, everybody is trying to take up this dominant space. So there's always this conflict going on to be the dominant one. It's subconscious. Even in the friendliest of conversations, it is very subconscious, but this is what gives a spark. Another thing that gives a spark is usually we kind of talk at cross purposes. So if you have a dialogue where I say, Rashmi, how are you? You say, Damyanti, I'm fine, thank you. How are you? And then I say, oh, it is very good. So you are just answering every question very nicely. So that is not really how we have conversations, right? When we have conversations, we are misunderstanding. And most of the time, what we are trying to do as humans, we are geared to try and figure out what the other person is thinking about the topic, about us, and about our surroundings, because that is how survival has geared us, right? Because all of human survival depends on how well we do teamwork. Because if we are left alone, there's no human society. The humanity would not have progressed where it has. So you always have to see that every person, it's a difficult thing to explain, but it's easy when you actually sit and think about it, is when I'm sitting and talking to you, I am not just thinking about what I'm saying, I am thinking about what you're thinking about what I'm saying. So at all times, we are trying to anticipate the other person, we are trying to interrupt. So if you have elements of that, if you know that, how is it that your character, who you know through all this pre-writing, how you know whether they'll interrupt, whether they'll keep quiet at this point, whether they'll try to put their point across, and what is it that they'll say? Will they readily reply? So always to remember that dialogue between two people, it's not like a question and answer like how we used to have in school. It is very much how do you say, curated. So it seems real, but it is really not conversation between two people, because it's like we say so many irrelevant things. But in our case, we are always keeping in mind what is the plot arc, what is the character arc, and we are always pruning the dialogue according to that as well. So all of this sounds very complicated, but as you practice it, you kind of get it. And dialogues are not easy, and I don't blame you at all for finding them hard. I hope this helped a little bit.
We are getting close to the time, but we have like 2-3 questions. Josh, is it okay if we go like 5 over? 5 or 10 maybe?
Yeah, that's fine on my end for sure.
I might not, yeah. I'm just going to take the next 2-3 questions and then I might have to wrap up. Namrata asks, are there any tips on writing gray characters? Apart from the usual research that I needed to write such characters, any pointers that will help us create memorable gray characters would be helpful.
Hi, Namrata. I think my recipe for creating any kind of character still remains the same. But when you talk about gray characters, we have to know why. The important question is not what. The important question is also probably not how. The important question is why. So if they are gray, what made them gray? Why are they gray? No infant is born like, I don't know if they're born with murderous instincts, but study that person, that gray person, from their toddlerhood all the way to when they're 7, all the way to when they're teenagers, all the way as they grow up. So what is it in their nature and nurture that made them who they are? So again, it is always going back to their history and asking why are they gray, asking why is it that their moral compass is not following certain things that we kind of take for granted. What is it that created their moral compass in the first place? And in response to what? What are the events? Because, our moral compass is a survival mechanism. It's a mechanism so that we can all cohabit in society. So what is it that made this person move away from this generally accepted things that we consider moral and this is ethical, this is right? And what is it that made them adopt certain different worldviews? So those are the questions to ask. Why is it that they went that way? And from there, probably, yeah.
All right. Ade asks, greetings. I didn't hear you mention audience focus. Do you not consider the audience you're writing for in the beginning? That is, do you simply or is your story most important? That is, do you simply write your story and the reader will find you?
So I begin by writing a story only for myself, simply because by the time I'm finished with that story, it's probably gone through 25 drafts. And if I don't like a story for myself and the characters, if I don't find it interesting, by the time now when the copy edits come, I will be so sick of it. And it's for all writers, right? We get so sick of our novels by the time they are published, because we've read it and we have read it and we have read it till it's all blurred. So yes, definitely I have to write a story which resonates with me, and then hopefully it'll resonate with the audience. By the time it comes into editing is when I start thinking about the audience, because that's when my agent is telling me or my editor is telling me what is this and how is this. And I'm now much more conscious about my audience, because my audience is no longer, I'm an Indian writing a story about India, but the book is not available in paperback in India. It is written for the US audience. So I need to figure out what translates to an American, how is the American audience taking it, what terms need to be explained, and how not to be too heavy-handed. And in the second book, based on reader feedback, we're actually doing a glossary. In the first, in the Blue Bar, which is right here, there is no glossary. In the Blue Monsoon, there will be a glossary and there will be a character list. So I think the first 1 or 2 drafts is totally for myself and within me. And then I bring in the agent and the editor, and then I bring in more beta readers and more people. And then, of course, the world comes in and then I get to know. So audience focus comes later. Primarily, it's me in the beginning.
Okay, I have Abigail's question. What do you do when the protagonist takes over the story and you find your story takes a turn you don't expect?
I see whether it is something that is true to the character, or it is something that I found shiny, new, oh, so nice. It will be so intriguing to just look at this other thing, right? This will be so new and shiny. Let me just go and explore that. If it is not coming from that place, but instead it is coming from a place of, yes, this is how the character is going to act based on who they are, then maybe the character does know more than me. Because what is that character? The character is a product of my subconscious, and my subconscious is far, far, far smarter than my conscious. So sometimes it only makes sense to listen to the subconscious. And in any case, when I'm writing novels, it's expected that I take 20,000 words and toss them, and then again take 30,000 words and toss them. That's my process. So I kind of, if I find that the character wants to do something, I want to go and see what the character wants to do. Finally, whether they get to do it or not, I'll decide later, but I definitely want to explore what they want to do. And why not? I mean, I must do it because it's about the character. It's not a story about me. It's a story about that character.
Viji Sridhar might be one of the last questions I'm able to take because of time. Planning a story is something I don't know how to do. I let the character's journey and evolve in the pages in the first draft. If foresight is essential, even at the first draft stage, after the middle section of the novel, will you just focus on the emotional aspects more and write scenes accordingly?
It depends on what stage of authorship you're at. It depends on how manyth novel it is that you're writing. If this is your first novel or second novel, the answer is different. If this is your 20th novel, the answer is different. These answers change as you grow in experience. So your first or second novel, I think it's perfectly fine to let it come, as it comes, and not force things, because you're still discovering what your process is. And I think one of the most important things is to not be afraid of the process, because the process is everything. If you don't have process, you have nothing. So even if the process feels hard, if the question is between this feels right but hard, and the other one is the easy one, then do what feels hard, because often the best writing comes from places that are difficult and that are scary and that you don't want to go into. And those are the spaces where you will find that the character really speaks to you. And yeah, follow that, follow whatever is hard for you, even if it's whether it's the emotional thing or whether you're thinking of, this is what the story is going to be. It's okay if the second half of the story doesn't fit the first half. You can always throw away the first half, but you've got that second half, right? So then what your second half is there, so now you can make the first half. But if you know that you have a first half and it doesn't feel right, but because you've written the first half and should I waste it, never mind, let me drag it to the conclusion. Not really, because the first draft is about discovery.
Okay, I think I saw a couple more questions. A second. I know Shilpa Gupte asked a question. Yeah, I found it. She asks, how do you work on a character or characters in flash fiction?
Hey, Shilpa. Shilpa is doing a very challenging thing of writing 26 stories, I think, for April. And that's where I think that question is very, very important. I think in flash fiction, the character also comes to you in a flash, and the process is much more intuitive than it is for the novel. So as it comes, you see if it feels right, because flash fiction is word by word and sentence by sentence. So flash fiction cannot be worked out from before. It can only be looked at in retrospect, saying, is this something that is making sense in terms of the want of the character and the misbelief? But it grows, flash fiction grows somewhat like fungus. So it grows, by itself, it grows organically. So you cannot impose too much of external rules on it while writing it. And in any case, it's so small, you can toss it and write it again. Sorry if that sounds cruel, but that's what I do.
All right. Aishwarya Lakshmi has a question, which is, she says, what you said about conversations was spot on. Thanks so much. In case I cannot find the book Improv, may I reach out to you on social media to find out the author's name?
Yes, please. You are on my social media. You can, of course, like anybody who knows me from before, please do. If you have a question, just please reach out to me. And if you don't know me from before, now you do. So just reach out to me with the question.
All right, that's a wrap, guys. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. Thank you, Damyanti. This is absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for making the time. Our next session is the last session for this year that I'm able to do with my schedule as of now. It is going to be on April 19th at the same time. And my guest is a Nepali American author called Anuja Ghimire, who has written a beautiful, I think two books of hers are right now out on poetry, and she's brilliant too. So thank you, you guys, for being here. You'll get a follow-up email from us, and keep writing. Thank you, Damyanti. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your patience, you guys. Take care, all of you. Hope to hear from you. Bye-bye.